Today, let's explore a totally different way to think about the self. So many of us feel completely exhausted by that constant question, who am I? But what if that fatigue isn't coming from confusion? What if it's really from the relentless pressure to keep ourselves locked into one fixed definition? It all seems to start with one simple but really heavy question. Yeah, this question, it kind of echoes, doesn't it? In our own minds, when we're with other people, even in our quietest moments. It can feel like this huge burden, a puzzle that we're supposed to solve once and for all. But searching for that one single stable answer, it often leaves us feeling more worn out than enlightened. So, where does this exhaustion really come from? It's not that we lack self-awareness, it's the pressure. The pressure from inside ourselves and from the outside world to maintain this consistent, solid identity. It's like we feel we need to build a fortress around a so-called core self and then defend it against a world that's always, always changing. And to build this fortress, what do? We draw lines. We create these really rigid separations between what we call ourself, what we see as others, and the world all around us. We try to pin everything down with these neat labels and definitions because we're hoping it'll give us some sense of security, some feeling of control. And this, right here, is where the friction starts. Our attempt to force these fixed definitions onto everything clashes with the reality of the world, which is just in constant, fluid motion. We're trying to build rigid walls, but life is actually made of these interconnected relationships that flow and shift. The more we try to contain it all, the less space we feel we have to just breathe. So, what's the alternative to this whole exhausting project? Well, it really requires a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing the self as some solid object that has to be defined and defended, what if we imagined it as something else entirely? This is the core idea we're playing with, the self as a transparent medium. It's not a thing, it's more of a place, a surface, where influences, relationships, and experiences all intersect. Now, this isn't about having no self, it's about seeing the self as more of a process, a point of intersection, rather than some fixed, solid object. Okay. So what does this mean for something like personal boundaries? If the self isn't a fortress that we have to defend, then what are its walls even for? You see, when we treat our boundaries like walls, they often just harden our relationships. They create friction and distance. For instance, a friend asks for a favor we really can't handle, and a rigid wall means a flat no that just creates a gap between you. But if we see the self as transparent, our boundaries become more like regulators. They aren't there just to block things out. They're there to manage the flow. So instead of a hard no, a regulator might allow for something like, I can't do that, but here's what I can do. It becomes a permeable filter, one that allows for natural adjustments and lets our relationships actually breathe. This shift in perspective also completely changes how we experience connection with other people. In our intimacy, in love, and even in silence. Look at the contrast here. In that first scenario, where the self is this solid, immovable center of everything, love can get distorted. We start treating other people like objects to be figured out or managed or even possessed. And silence? It feels threatening, like an absence that has to be filled. But in the second scenario, where the self is a transparent medium, all of that pressure just dissolves. We can encounter others directly, without a rigid filter. Relationships aren't about ownership anymore, and silence is no longer an absence. It becomes a shared, connective space. The goal here isn't to provide you with some new definitive answer to who am I. The whole point is to move away from the need for a final answer in the first place. It's really just about leaving room for a different way of being. So maybe we can just let go of this question. We can release ourselves from the pressure it creates, from that endless, exhausting project of defining and defending a single fixed self. And in its place, we can start to ask something different. It's a question that's not about definition, but about awareness. Not, who am I? But instead, what is passing through me? See, this question doesn't need a static answer. It just invites us to observe the flow of experiences, feelings, and connections that make up our lives moment by moment. It's a more spacious, more gentle, and maybe a more honest way to be.